Hello, folks. Welcome back to English 200. This is going to be a video lecture on the last text of the semester. As you can see here, Module 11 and then Module 12, the last text of the semester is Othello. This video lecture will be for quiz number 9, which is due November 8th. And I'll be using, as it says here, 1 to 2 means Acts 1 to 2. And there are readings inside of the, Google Drive of our course that have each act individually broken down. So if you click on the link to the Google Drive, you'll see here an entire, two folders really. One is for the slides or images that I will use in discussing and breaking down the play. Then there's another folder, which is the play itself in dramatized form. That is, this is, as you can see, there are 4, let me put this in list view. There are 4 files here. 2 are AVI files, part 1 and part 2. AVI stands for audio visual input, so they're video files. And you can see here there are 2 matching subtitle files. That's what the .srt stands for, subtitle file. So I would highly recommend, if you guys are actually interested in learning about this play, one of my favorite plays, that you download all 4 of these files here and you put them in a folder on your desktop or computer. Do not try to watch this film inside of this folder in the Google Drive. It won't work or work very well. And when you have all 4 of these files inside of one folder, you can then start the first part, this AVI file. And because the subtitle files will be inside of the folder, you will also see the, I clicked on this link, I'm not going to download it because I already have it. The subtitle files will play automatically, and it is 99% the accurate language of the play itself. So it's the characters speaking and acting in Shakespeare's play, and you have his Renaissance or Elizabethan diction in the subtitles. So there's that entire folder. There is, of course, in the text folder, a set of, as you can see at the bottom here, a set of readings, Acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down here at the bottom. And these are the files that I will be using. Like today, I'll be using these 2 files, Act 1 and 2, to discuss the text, and then next week, the other 3 files or acts. Okay. So today, speaking of those texts, I should point out that I'm using texts from the Norton Shakespeare. It's actually from the 2nd edition because there's now, as you can see here, a 3rd edition out. But it's the only thing that has changed in the play are the page numbers, really. So it's the same exact play and introductory essay. The essay is written by Walter Cohen here, who used to be at Cornell, but I guess he's now at Michigan. Anyhow, okay, so this play is really only one, maybe two. There's another sort of minor character, Caliban, in another play that is a person of color. So Shakespeare puts, kind of front and center the issue of race or color in this play. And of course, Grambling being an HBCU, it's kind of important to think about race in relation to Shakespeare, who's, aside from the Bible, one of the most widely read authors on the planet. And the essay by Walter Cohen begins, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line," which is a quotation from Du Bois. So prophesies the African-American intellectual and activist W.E.B. Du Bois in his classic study, The Soul of Black Folks, 1903, just as the century began. Of course, having a PhD from Harvard, Du Bois would have certainly been well steeped in Shakespeare. But today, Cohen goes on, Othello, which was first written and printed in 1602, 1603, just after Queen Elizabeth dies. Othello speaks to readers and audiences alike with unusual power, largely because it explores race and racism in an unsettling fashion, which we'll certainly talk about here in a moment. And then to talk about the themes, Cohen says, in Othello, to oversimplify one issue, jealousy, was formerly prominent while another, race, has emerged or reemerged only recently. Neither race nor jealousy is the play's sole concern. In other words, he's admitting that yes, race and jealousy are certainly themes in the play, but it's much more than that. It's a very complex play. Othello provocatively instigates gender and sexuality. It is preoccupied with class conflict, morality, and metaphysics. And it sets out its central domestic disaster against the international conflict between Venetians and Turks over the island of Cyprus, a religious, political, and military antagonism that subtly informs the characters' catastrophic personal relationships. So all of that is going on to play and more. These images are in the slide folder as well. And there's a color version of this one. So what you have here are two different representations during Shakespeare's era, what is called the Moor. The Tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice, is the entire full title of the play. And so we know that Othello is a Moor, but it was not certain that, as depicted in this kind of almost caricature woodcut on the right, that Othello is Black or African. He could have been, as the image on the left shows, he could have been somewhere from the Middle East in a lighter complexion, because a Moor at the time, as it says here, could be an Arab or Berber. Berber is still a group of peoples in northern Africa who are not, genetically African per se, or another sub-Saharan, suggesting the range of images Shakespeare may have had in mind. So left, the one up here with the sword, is the Moroccan ambassador to Queen Elizabeth I, 1600. So this was a real person, and you can see he's of a kind of Arabic, with the turban, Arabic descent. And then on the right, a Moor from Cesar Baccelio's Degli Habiti Antici et Moderni, modurani, excuse me, which translates to the habit of ancient and modern peoples, basically. So, you know, Othello, the character's skin color and origin certainly becomes an issue in the play, but again, it's not exactly certain what is, what do you call it, his background or origin. So don't try to force the issue that he's automatically Black or he's automatically Arab. So a little bit later in this essay, Cohen points out that there's an association between sex and death. This is one of the plays that is less often taught in high school. You might get Romeo and Juliet, maybe Hamlet, but there's some language and some depictions in this play, aside from the overt racism, that may get high school teachers into trouble because of the language that Shakespeare uses and the images he depicts. And so sex becomes an issue in the play itself, as this entire paragraph basically describes. Another image here is, as it says, the manner of Turkish tyranny over the Christian slaves. So one of the anxieties, if you will, I call it cultural anxiety, is that, and I'm going to show you, is that people who are of Islamic faith and therefore called Turks in a kind of disparaging manner. So think all the way back to the Quran in the first half of the semester. They were believed to be barbaric because they worshiped another god and had these very, exotic and peculiar practices of dress as well as behavior and language. And they, of course, thought that as soon as the Turk, the Muslim, captured any Christians, they would enslave them and treat them accordingly. And there's a little bit of truth of that, but there's also truth that it worked the other way around. If you think of the Crusades that I mentioned in the Quran section. So Cohen says here out to the side, the language of color in the play draws on the biblical association of Blackness and evil, Elizabethan prejudice toward Black Africans resident in England, and ethnographic accounts of passionately jealous Africans in the early stages of the slave trade. So, if you remember back to the sort of shift in the Gilgamesh story of the flood, where the raven is the one that is successful, the story in Noah in the flood is the dove. It's just the opposite in coloring, right? So there's a emphasis in Shakespeare's time and the Renaissance in general, the Renaissance, as we would say, the rebirth of learning and art and culture out of the quote unquote dark ages or middle ages. And Cohen goes on to say, yet it, meaning the play, yet it lacks the full racist import it subsequently acquired, meaning at the time of Shakespeare, it wasn't as charged as it was later in the play's history and reception. He goes on, Renaissance thought was innocent of the biological view of ethnic difference that triumphed in the 19th century, which would be the 1800s. Othello's mention of being, quote, sold to slavery, which occurs in Act 1, Scene 3, line 137. So that's how you read these Shakespearean play line notation citations. When he's sold into slavery, given its Mediterranean context, has more to do with social hierarchy and religious difference than skin color. That is to say, people were being sold into slavery all of the time, in and around Northern Africa and the Mediterranean. I mean, go back as far as the Greeks and the Spartans and so on. Didn't necessarily have to do with one's skin color or genetics. It had to do with where you fell on the social hierarchy. And speaking of the Mediterranean, he goes on to say, in Act 1, Othello, an Orthodox Christian and loyal servant of the state, agrees to defend Venice, which is Italy and that's Christian, from the Turks, to protect Christianity from a Muslim people with whom Moors were linked on religious, political, and military grounds. By having Venice send Othello to that island to protect Christian interests from the forces of Islam, Shakespeare inserts his protagonist into a defining struggle of the age. And as I'll show you, Cyprus is in the middle of the Mediterranean. And then finally, Cohen says the external military conflict returns an internal division within Othello's soul. Othello half assumes an ethnic and religious otherness to exorcise his guilt, to get rid of his guilt. The development of the plot both undermines and validates ethnocentric and racist stereotypes. But is this conclusion really about race, or does it turn instead on religious and hence cultural antagonism? And that's a question you could try to answer in the second essay, because you could certainly write on Othello in essay 2. Okay. So this begins, there's the full title, The Tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice. It's important to, have the subtitle in there because it tells us about the protagonist or hero. So you'll always see this, what's called dramatis personae in a play, a list of the characters and like a box of ingredients with the largest, most important ingredient first. They're listed in terms of importance in the play. So of course, Othello is the, central figure in this tragedy. Below him is his wife, who is Caucasian, Desdemona. Desdemona is the daughter of, down here, Brabantio. Sometimes his name is spelled with a T instead of a Z, but it's the same character. The Norton here spells it with a Z. It's important to know that he's a senator of Venice. Venice is its own city-state, if you will, or dukedom. And therefore he's a pretty, her father's a pretty prominent person, and she's basically, the daughter of an aristocrat. So below Desdemona is Michael Cassio. And this is important to know the distinction between these military terms. Lieutenant, or as in the Kenneth Branagh and Lawrence Fishburne production that is inside of that folder of the video files. They pronounce it in the British way, lieutenant, because of course they're speaking English Shakespearean play. But a lieutenant or lieutenant is actually higher in rank than an ensign. In terms of the Navy, let's say, an ensign is the lowest rank. And that is what Iago, who is the villain of the play, and perhaps is just as important in the play, I would perhaps argue he's even more important or prominent, let's say, than Othello. That this is one of the reasons why Iago is angered at Othello, that this younger, inexperienced Michael Cassio is promoted over him as a lieutenant because Othello is only an ensign. Bianca, who's actually has kind of a cameo role in this play, is a courtesan or high-price escort, you might say, in love with Cassio. And courtesans in Venice of this era, and Italy in general of this era, were sort of a known quantity in the social scene. That is, as long as wives were not publicly confronted about a husband's affairs, then they could, turn a blind eye. Not necessarily that they condoned it, but it was just part of the social scene. And notice the word itself, courtesan, it means that she had access to men of wealth and power in the court, in the kind of close realm of the monarchy. And other characters that I will explain as they appear. So let me switch slightly to the, what do you call it? To the images that appear in the slide folder. I'll just go through some of them fairly quickly. So the play, as I mentioned, is in Venice. This is, as you can see, a screenshot of a Google map. So there's Venice. It's a coastal city, beautiful city, but it's kind of like, for me, a false analogy, Amsterdam or New Orleans, in that there are a lot of canals. It's right on the coast, and it's basically a waterway city. But Act 1 begins here in Venice. The entire rest of the play, Acts 2, 3, 4, and 5, are set here on this island in the Eastern Mediterranean called Cyprus. And notice how close it is to Turkey. Again, this is a present day map, but still the geography was the same. So what is happening in the play in the background when they're talking about the Ottoman Empire is that Venice wants to maintain control over Cyprus because it forms a perfect sort of foothold and stepping stone into the Middle East, and in turn further east into what we call the Silk Road trade. And here is another map closer. You can see just really how close Cyprus is. And this is where Othello is sent to defend against the Turks. We talked previously, about the Middle East, and there's Lebanon, where I was at one point, and right below that would be Israel, where of course, the home of Judaism is. So we're kind of returning to the Middle East in a certain way. And if you recall, when we were talking about the Quran earlier, Muhammad dies in 632 AD. But as you can see from this color-colored map, the Ottoman Empire, as it's known, had a fairly large sway and swath over northern Africa and up to southern and central Europe. But as you can see, not Venice, right? So Italy itself is still Christian and Catholic. Here's another map to think about this spread of the Ottoman Empire. So here in gold, if you will, or yellow, it says Ottoman Empire. And if you've ever wondered, why we call that thing you put your feet on in front of a sofa an ottoman, it's a cushion for your feet. But it comes from the notion, and practice still today, of people in this culture, Middle Eastern, Turkish culture, that they don't sit on like chairs and sofas. I mean, yes, modern day they do, but traditionally, historically, they would sit on cushions on the floor and, eat on the floor, sitting on cushions and whatnot. That's partly where we get that term for that piece of furniture. But notice in Northern Africa here in blue, it says the Barbary coast. of Africa, with Morocco, which is where the term Moor comes from, here across from southern Spain. So the Barbary Coast is important in the play because on the one hand, early on here in Act 1, Othello is called a barbarian, right? That's where we get that word barbarian. And they're called barbarians, and it's called the Barbary Coast because there were in fact pirates, on the northern coast. And there's still pirates around, actually, around Africa. Another reason is that we'll learn that Desdemona says her mother at one point, and this is, I believe, in Act 4, had a maid who was called Barbary. So here's another map of it. You can see the Barbary coast, right? And this is actually a French map. Okay, so here's, at the time anyway, you can see the Ottoman Empire here. Venice, right? It was its own republic, its own kind of fiefdom or duchy, as they say, as was all of these, the duchy of Milan or Savoy, Florence, and of course the papal states we talked about with Martin Luther last time. Papal meaning related to the Pope or Papa, right here. So it was a fractured collection of city-states before it was eventually unified later, because we're here talking about the early 1500s early 1600s of Shakespeare's era. So I want you to keep in mind the geographical difference here between Venice here and Florence down here in the south, or southern, compared to Venice, because this is where Florence is where Cassio is from. And Cassio, therefore, is considered an outsider and immediately suspect. This is the 1623 edition, as you can see down here, of the first printing of all of Shakespeare's plays together. It's called the Folio, with all the comedies, histories, and tragedies, published according to the true original copies. Not entirely true, but this is the first time that Shakespeare's plays were all gathered together in one, as it says, catalog, or what we would call the table of contents. And he, notice again, 1623, he was not alive for this publication. He dies in 1616, so he had no say over whether or not all of these should be in the right categories of comedies, histories, and tragedies. But some of you have, I hope, have read a number of these. There's often in high school at least one or more tragedies, Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth, Hamlet, Lear, and so on. But here we're doing Othello, the Moor of Venice. There are many representations of Shakespeare. There were, of course, no photographs, but this is probably the closest portrait of him. It's called the Chandos portrait. And again, his dates 1564 to 1616. So he's roughly, living at the same time as Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII, who broke off from the Catholic Church. And Shakespeare here is sporting an earring because back then earrings were fashionable, as they have been recently. This is his genealogical background briefly. That is, he was the son of John Shakespeare and Mary Arden. They have several children, and he's the third in line. And William himself ends up marrying in 1582 an older woman, Anne Hathaway. He's born in 1564, but she's born earlier in 1556, and that was actually not the norm. In fact, you could argue it's still not the norm, that it's usually the male is either a couple or more years older than the woman. But anyway, they go on to have 3 children, one of whom dies. The middle son dies when he's about 11. And notice his name. It's 1 letter off from his most famous tragedy, Hamlet. And I'll let you make of what you will about a father writing a tragedy in which the tragedy is a prince who sees the ghost of his father. We know quite a deal about Shakespeare because we have, like here, his handwritten will and testament, or will's will, if you will. His signature on a lot of documents like this, playhouse documents of sale, or supply buying, or various documents. He lived, of course, in England, which was not at the time unified politically. And this is just a Google map showing you how far away he lived in a town called Stratford upon Avon. And so he was away from his wife for quite some time. Back then, I mean, you could get there today in a little under an hour by car, but it would take several days by horse or carriage to travel to London back then. So this is London of his era. And right here is, if you've ever heard that nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, falling down. This is London Bridge. And this is the Thames, the river that still flows through London. The Thamesis is here, as it's written in Latin. And down at the bottom here is where all of the kind of illegal activities were. Playgoing was considered illegal because it was all males on the stage. Women cannot be allowed to perform, and therefore think of Romeo and Juliet, right? It's a male dressed up as a woman and then enamored with another male on stage, as well as gambling and prostitution and whatnot occurred on this, what's called Southwark or South Bank. And you can see here the Globe, which is one of Shakespeare's playhouses. So model reconstruction. And we know about this because there are lots of historical documents about it, and they have reconstructed the actual playhouse to its original splendor on the same exact site. So if you're ever in London and you want to go to the Globe and catch a play and see what it would be like during the Renaissance and Shakespeare's era, you can go see that because they put on plays still to this day. So our play, the Tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice, as I mentioned, is mostly Acts 2, 3, 4, and 5, set on the island of Cyprus here in the beautiful blue Mediterranean. And as you can see from this image, there's a mosque here on Cyprus because it is, till this day, still largely indebted to Muslim culture. Here's a current map of Cyprus, and the yellow portion, the north and northeastern portion, belongs to, as you can see, the Turkish side, or Turkish Cypriots. Cypriot is someone from Cyprus. And then the white area is controlled by the Greek Cypriot. So Venice or Italy did not end up winning a portion of Cyprus, but in fact, Greece did, which of course makes sense because it's much closer, but it's still today a fractured country that in large part owes its culture to Muslim and Islamic religion. Here's the beginning of the play itself and the quarto version. You can read this. It's not Old English. This is actually considered modern English. But the spelling is quite different. So remember, they use U for a V and that kind of thing. So this begins with that letter T, tush. Never tell me, I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who has had my purse, as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this. And the actual text begins here the same way. Iago and Roderigo. Remember, Iago's the villain, and Roderigo here is the play's dupe, if you will, or fop, who is a kind of finely dressed dandy or kind of upper class guy who really does not have much wit or intelligence about him. He just has money and appearance. And this is what Roderigo represents in the play. But as you can see, he's in love with Desdemona. And Iago purports to be his friend, but as we learn, he's really not. So they're the only ones on the scene at the moment. However, they're watching from a distance. Othello and Desdemona get married. And in order to understand the play, I have to give you lots of spoilers. Of course, Othello marries the daughter of Brabantio, and therefore he's not only marrying without the father's permission, but he's, a darker, whether he's African or Berber or Arab, he's a darker skinned, culturally different person marrying a Caucasian Venetian woman. And therefore Roderigo is incensed by this. He says, tush, like I just read, but in modern spelling, hush or tush. And by the way, whenever there's what's called a degree sign, right here, this little circle, that means you should look over to the gloss. Oops, sorry about that. Over off to the side. So they've glossed this, never tell me, or annoyance or disbelief. I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who has had my purse, as if the strings were thine, shouldst know us of this. That's how the play begins. And the this is that Desdemona and Iago are eloping. Because again, Iago is in the service as an ensign of the general Othello. Othello is the high-ranking general of the Venetian army. And so when he says purse here, he does not mean like, a woman's purse, but all of, this is a Renaissance, all of the men who had money, and it would have been men who had money, generally speaking, they had a little pouch, whether leather or cloth, that was tied to their waist, right? Which they had coins in, because that was the only form, either jewels or coins, are the only form of payment. And that's where we get that term, the purse strings. So he's basically upset, Roderigo is upset with Iago for saying, how could you know about this and not tell me? And then right away, Iago lies about it. And what we will learn about this villain is that he's a consummate liar. You could say that he is an engineer in the play of, putting people like a chess master also in places exactly where they need to be, kind of making people think certain things. Maybe you could call him a puppet master, pulling people's strings. And he's like, denying it, that is blood or God's blood. You couldn't on stage say God's blood because it would actually be considered defamatory. So they truncated it to bloods, right? Kind of like a curse word. But you'll not hear me, like you won't believe me. If I ever did dream of such a matter, abhor me, or hate me if I ever did dream of such a matter. And we will come to hate the reader, and lots of characters will come to hate Iago. So this is what begins in the play. And one of the, again, I mentioned this earlier, the cultural anxieties that manifest it in this play is that the Turks, represented by here, these, turbaned and kind of hookah smoking, probably Berbers in Northern Africa, would steal Caucasian or kidnap Caucasian women and enslave them for their harems, right? And this was, something that could have happened, probably did happen, but not necessarily on a wide scale basis. Because as you can see down here, other women were captured. But it was the Europeans' kind of hypersensitivity to this particular issue of white women, in particular Caucasians, being conscripted or what do you call it? Kind of enslaved into a harem. A harem is, a place for a wealthy sheik or Islamic pasha, powerful politician or prince, perhaps, to keep his concubines or women. And this scene, you can see here, this is, basically human trafficking that still goes on today, unfortunately, right? And there's, again, the hookah, which plays a prominent role in all of these images. Again, there's a hookah down here, to remind us that one of the ways in which they entrapped women, supposedly, and here, this is another harem, was to get women hooked on opium and or heroin. Well, heroin is a form of opium, which they weren't probably smoking cannabis in the hookahs. They were probably smoking some combination of hashish and opium, which after a time you can get easily hooked on, of course. This is a scene where you have a eunuch who is, allowed to be in the harem, but he would have to have been castrated in order to be in the harem for obvious reasons. Again, there's the hookah. So this is something that manifests itself in the play in terms of the father, especially Brabantio's concern that his daughter has been basically kidnapped by the black man or the Moor Othello. And so regardless of how it's portrayed on stage, and it has had a long, distinguished performance over the centuries, ever since it appeared in 1602 to 03, that there's always this kind of racial tension, obviously, between a darker Othello and the lighter Desdemona. And I would argue that this racial tension still occurs, and certainly, in the South, it's more prevalent. I think it was only in 1970, during the what's called Loving versus Virginia case, that what's called miscegenation or interracial marriage was finally made legal. But before this, 1970, it was considered illegal. More interracial couples are appearing, but this is an Indian version of the play. But it's still kind of tainted with a certain amount of taboo on both sides, I would argue, of the racial divide. Of course, this is a tragedy, so spoiler alert, someone must die. In fact, multiple people die in this play. This, by the way, is the CD or DVD cover of the production that is in the folder in our Google Drive. This is the Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh production. Kenneth Branagh is a very famously Shakespearean trained British actor and director. And of course, you know, Lawrence Fishburne is, and he plays Othello here. So in this particular configuration here, we have Othello, the general here, his longtime serving ensign, Iago, so that's the villain of the play. And then the newly established, but younger and inexperienced Michael Cassio, who is from Florence. And then, of course, Irene Jacobs playing Desdemona. It's a great production. Again, the subtitles use the actual language, and there's Lawrence Fishburne from my favorite film, Apocalypse Now. And here he is, you may remember, in The Matrix. And here he is more recently at an award ceremony. So one of the themes, if you will, of this play is that it's about, you know, seeing versus hearing. That is to say, over and over again, I'll just, you know, cut to the chase in terms of the plot. Iago here, who is, for all understandable intents and purposes, entirely trusted by his general Othello. Iago here is going to tell lies to other people and straight to Othello about his wife Desdemona cheating on him. Now, we will know from reading the play that none of this is true, but as I mentioned earlier, Iago is a master engineer, puppet master, chess master, whatever metaphor you want to use, of getting people to do and think certain things. And he preys upon Iago's what is in Shakespeare's characterization, predisposition to anger, to jealousy. And here in this image in the film, he's literally like pouring poison into his ear. And Othello will over and over again, up to a point, tell Iago, please give me the proof, the ocular proof, the visual proof that my wife is cheating on me. Of course, Iago never really does. He provides instead circumstantial evidence. So one of the major kind of structural elements in this play and other plays is that it is a tragedy, and therefore it has a certain kind of movement about it, as do all tragedies. Otherwise, they're not tragedies. So, as you can see from this, if I can get it to move here, see from this diagram, on the left-hand side, you have the inward to outward movement symbolized by the circle that starts inwardly and then slowly spins throughout the play in a larger outward fashion until by the end of the play, because in this case it's a comedy, you end in the world of sociality and marriage, maybe even one or more births predicted or happening. So it ends on a happy note, and it must, in order for it to be a happy ending, if you will. And conversely, here on the right-hand side, the hero protagonist begins in the world of sociality, and then slowly, because of events happening in the play, is further and further isolated into this kind of downward spiral, and must end in tragedy, typically death or multiple deaths. Otherwise, it's not a tragedy. And so this is what we have in our play. All right, those are the images for the play itself, and I will just kind of go through some of the more salient or important parts in the play here. So here's where early on Iago criticizes Cassio. He, in this case, is Shakespeare. And yes, I agree that it's difficult to read Shakespearean, Elizabethan, Renaissance diction, but you need to read it as an entire sentence all the way to a semicolon or to a period, right? So let's just take this little reading here. There's going to be a semicolon right here after him. So we read that as a full sentence, and then all the way to the end to the period as another sentence. Three great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped or took off their caps, off-cap to him. That is three great ones of the city, meaning there are three important senators or prominent politicians. In personal suit or personal appeal to Othello to make me Iago, because Iago is speaking this at the moment, to make me Iago his, Othello's lieutenant. They off cap to him. They often took off their caps to him. So he's saying that these important politicians tried to show deference and favoritism to Othello by this kind of show of respect by taking off your hat to Othello. And by the faith of man, I know my price. That is, he knows his worth in terms of a military man. I am worth no worse a place. We will see that is probably not true because he lies about things, including to people to their face. But this is what he says about Cassio. I've already chose my officer, and he's quoting Othello. I've already chose my officer. And what was he? Or in the Shakespeare Renaissance Elizabethan diction, it means, and who was he? And who was he, or what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, a fellow almost damned in a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of the battle knows, more than a spinster, unless the bookish theoric. So if you read all of the gloss on the side, but also the footnote, whenever there's a footnote, like there's a footnote 3 right here, if you're blowing out the footnotes, you will miss a lot of the information and some of the answers to the quizzes. It says here that Cassio's knowledge of war is purely theoretical, which is where we get the bookish theoric reference. In other words, Cassio is what we used to call in the Marines a butter bar, a brand new kind of minted commissioned officer who got out of the academy but has never actually been in combat. And therefore, Iago is incensed at this because he's been serving with Iago for a long time in actual battles. He tells us quite clearly, I follow him as I follow Othello to serve my turn upon him. So he doesn't mind telling Roderigo this because he's going to use Roderigo in his schemes and machinations. Here's a reference about an ensign being lower than a lieutenant. Here is some of the language that is obviously connotative of perhaps an African person, but is also obviously racist, and it comes from an Italian or Venetian Roderigo, who, like Brabantio, though I would argue Brabantio is more overtly racist, is clearly caricaturing Othello and people of color here. Iago says to call up her father to wake Desdemona's father. In other words, let's try to get Iago and Othello in trouble for, running off with his wife. And then Brabantio enters. He's, it's middle of the night, and he's going to use some crude language here to describe the elopement of Othello and Desdemona. He tells, Iago, are your doors locked, right? Because apparently, you're robbed. And he kind of means that literally, in the sense of back in the day, women were considered property of their husbands until they were given to their, they were considered property of their fathers until they were married and then given to their husbands and became property of the husbands. So like literally and figuratively, bodily and whatever dowry or inheritance they came with. So Iago says here in a very kind of crude manner, just to try to incense the father, to get him to visualize what is happening. Even now, very now, an old black ram, meaning Othello, is tupping or topping, it says here, copulating with your white ewe. A ewe is a female sheep, and of course a ram is a male sheep. So he's using here bestial, imagery to suggest that your daughter is having sex with a black man right now in a particular position, right? That's Iago for you. And again, not another reason why it's difficult to teach this play in high school settings. And this is a bit of important information. Brabantio recognizes Roderigo, and he says, I have charged thee, or warned thee, not to haunt about my doors. And on his plainness, thou hast heard me say, my daughter is not for thee. So it's a reminder that Roderigo has in fact been pursuing Desdemona, but unsuccessfully, because he's a fop, he's a dupe, he's not of Desdemona's level or in her league, and Brabantio the father has warded him off already. Here's that reference to Barbary that I mentioned. Iago says to the father, you'll have your daughters covered with a Barbary horse. You'll have your nephews neigh to you. You'll have coursers, which is a kind of horse for cousins, and genets, another kind of horse for Germans. So he's, connoting the potential offspring of Desdemona and Othello as bestial again, subhuman, like horses. And he goes on to make it clear, I am one, sir, that comes to tell you that your daughter and the Moor, so he names him, because everyone knew his nickname, if you will, the Moor, as Othello, are now making the beast with two backs, right? To kind of further incense the father, to make him imagine this unseemly scene. So once this has, transpired, then Brabantio leaves the house with his entourage, and they happen to meet Iago in the middle of the street in a moment. And notice what he says of what he thinks of what's happened with Othello, or the elopement. Oh, treason of the blood, that is, my daughter, who's my blood relative, has betrayed me. Fathers, from hence trust not your daughters' minds by what you see them act. In other words, just because they may act all goody two-shoes doesn't mean your daughters are behaving in a ladylike manner. Is there not charms by which the property of youth and maidenhood may be abused? And it's this word charms that they gloss here over as magic, in this case, black magic, that Brabantio believes that only black magic has been used on his daughter, or could have been used to make her change. So here we have Othello and Iago out in the street when they're going to be confronted by the father. So Cassio comes in on the scene as well. So we now have this whole scene, which I just showed you a moment ago on the back cover of that DVD cover. They're all raising their swords and confronting each other. And we're told by Cassio that the Duke, who is basically like the president or, the one in charge of the dukedom, the Duke does greet you, General, and he requires your post-haste appearance even on the instant. In other words, the Duke, who's the most important person in the dukedom, has just told you to hurry it up to the palace. And it's something from Cyprus, meaning there's information or news that we need to contend with at Cyprus. So here Brabantio now enters the scene, and there's Othello. So now we're going to have this confrontation, and Iago draws his sword. And this is where we have Brabantio use these, very racist kind of constructions of Othello. Oh, thou foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter or kidnapped my daughter? Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her. Or I'll refer to me to all things of sense. If she in chains of magic were not bound, whether a maid so tender, fair, and happy, so opposite to marriage that she shunned the wealthy curled darlings of our nation, that it would be like Roderigo, the wealthy curly darlings of our nation, would never have to incur the general mock, run from her guardage, meaning him, he's her guardian, to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear, not to delight. In long roundabout terms, that there's no thing that could have made her run to you, a black man, except she were not in chains of magic, right? And he goes on to say that thou hast practiced on her with foul charms, abused her delicate youth with drugs or minerals that weakens motion. We might call that a roofie today, but as you saw in the images I showed you earlier, opium and heroin, hashish, and so on were certainly part of the Mediterranean scene. So they eventually resolved to let the Duke himself settle this. So here in 1.3, they're in the Duke's palace, the Doge's palace, as it were. And we're told that from the information letters they have that, yes, they all conform to a Turkish fleet and bearing up to Cyprus. That is, there's a fleet of Turkish ships approaching Cyprus to take it. So we need to hurry and send Othello there. Right, the Turkish preparation makes for Rhodes, which is in the Mediterranean. So now Brabantio and Othello and everyone has come into the Doge's palace. And notice how the Duke addresses him here: valiant Othello, we must straight employ you against the general enemy Ottoman, or the Turk, another name for the Turks. That is, he calls him valiant Othello. And to be valiant means you need to have valor and be brave and courageous. So he's thought of at this point as, a really good and worthy general. But Brabantio here is complaining about the elopement. Obviously, she is abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells and medicines of mountebanks or by quacks, right? That she thinks Othello has used on her, or he thinks Othello has used on her. So he, points to the Moor directly and, names him as the kidnapper. And then in this very famous speech by Othello, he admits, he says, yes, I've taken taken her daughter if I married her, right? But he will say, I haven't used any drugs on her. In fact, the only thing I've used is, you know, you might call my charm, my stories of me. I will a round, unvarnished tale deliver of my whole course of love, what drugs, what charms, what conjuration, what mighty magic. For such proceeding, I'm charged with all. I won his daughter. In other words, if, you know, you're going to hear my story and I'm going to tell you, and you can see that I didn't, you know, drug her, trick her. I won her heart, right? And they fetch Desdemona, like she's some kind of dog, to testify that yes, she in fact is married to Othello. And this is where his story begins. Her father, so that's Brabantio, her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life from year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. In other words, Othello is in Brabantio's house quite often, and Desdemona's around the corner in the next room, and she hears all of these stories about, you know, his fantastic feats of, you know, disastrous chance, of moving accidents by flood and field, of hairbreadth escape in the imminent deadly breach, right? Of being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery, of our redemption thence, right? All of these kind of, for a young woman who's never traveled anywhere, to hear about these exploits is just kind of fantastic. And she's kind of just enthralled with his story, right? And then he says, my story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of kisses. In other words, you know, she's basically fallen in love with him. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This is only the witchcraft. This only is the witchcraft I have used, right? So it's not actual drugs, right? It's romance. But of course, Brabantio doesn't want to believe that. So in this moment, Desdemona's in on the scene, and she basically invokes here another theme of the play, and that's a divided duty here. You can see here that people have divided loyalties throughout the play. And she conjures up a very common one, that is when daughters leave their fathers and get married, they then have a duty to their husbands as a wife, rather than to the immediate duty of their father. She says, I do perceive here a divided duty. To you, I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. So thank you for that, right? You are the Lord of duty, and I'm hitherto your daughter. But, and this is what Brabantio doesn't want to hear, here's my husband. And so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the Moor, my lord. In other words, you know, my mother, whom you married and produced me, she had to leave her husband, her father, and marry her husband, and, you know, was loyal to you as her wife. So, or your wife, excuse me. So she's using logic that Brabantio doesn't want to hear. And at this moment, it's pretty harsh, but Brabantio basically disowns her in a kind of public setting, because they're in the palace here. God be with you, or, you know, God by you. In other words, you know, goodbye. I have done, like I'm done with you. Peace, please your grace onto the affairs of state. And then very cruelly, he says, I'd rather to adopt a child than to get it or beget it or have it. And then very reluctantly, he puts the hand of Desdemona into Othello's hand, you know, in that kind of moment you would see in walking down the aisle of a church. Come hither, Moor, but he does so incredibly reluctantly. I heard you give thee that with all my heart, which, but thou hast already, with all my heart, I would keep from thee. So, you know, I'm putting her hand in your hand, but I'd rather keep it from you. So the Turk is making for Cyprus, as we already learned. And then Desdemona asks, rather than be left behind in Venice, if she can go with Othello to the wars. And the Duke says, well, you decide, right? Which they do, and they both end up going rather than leaving her at home. He says, honest Iago, which is a phrase that's used over and over again throughout this play, but we know in a dramatic irony way that Iago's anything but honest. My Desdemona, I must leave to thee. In other words, I have to go on the ship by myself in front of the fleet to Cyprus, but in your care, my friend Iago, I'm leaving my wife, in fact, new bride, with thee. So at the end of this act, it is just Roderigo and Iago here on the scene. And he says at least 5 times to tell Roderigo to put money in his purse, put money in your purse, right? And the reason he's doing this is because what Roderigo is doing is giving money, his own money, whether jewels or property or actual cash, coin, to Iago, so that in turn, Iago can give the money to Desdemona and say, hey, this comes from Roderigo. He wants to be your suitor, right? He's basically trying to ply Desdemona with all these gifts to get on her good side, so to speak. So therefore, put money in thy purse, right? And give it to me, is what he's saying. Go make money. And then once Roderigo has left the scene, right, he says, I'll sell all my land. Again, he's a dupe, he's a fop, he's not a very smart guy. And that's exactly what Iago wants. And once he leaves, this is the first of many soliloquies in the play. A soliloquy is a monologue that is spoken when no one else is on the stage, and therefore serves as like the internal thoughts of a character. But of course, if they don't speak, we can't hear them. So we get to learn a lot about characters in soliloquies, and in the very word soliloquy, because it's a kind of unfettered or uncensored thought or language of the character, and we get to learn about, in this case, Iago's dastardly plan. And as soon as Roderigo leaves, he says, thus do I ever make my fool my purse. His fool would be Roderigo, and of course his purse would be his own purse, his own checkbook, if you will. And then in those uncertain terms, very clearly, remember, he's the only one on the stage, but the audience can hear this. He says, I hate the Moor. And here's what we call second reason for his anger and plot against Othello. The first reason I already mentioned to you, which was that Iago has been passed over for promotion and Cassio has been made lieutenant instead of Iago. So he's angry about that, about the position, as he will say later. The second reason is right here. He says, I hate the Moor, and it is thought abroad, or it is rumored about, that twixt, which is a Renaissance diction for between, that between my sheets, he, Othello, has done my office. And what he means by office here is his husbandly duty of having sex with his wife. And the wife of Iago is Emilia, whom we will meet. He says, I know not if it be true. So I'm not sure, because it's a rumor, but I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do or act, take it as if for surety, meaning I'll take it for a certainty. So this is the other motivating factor for his revenge. And that's specifically what kind of play this is. It's a revenge tragedy. So on the one hand, it's to, get back at Othello for being passed over for promotion. And it's to this suspicion that he thinks Othello has slept with his wife, Emilia. And here is the other kind of revenge, right? So he's not just going to get back at Othello, but he's going to also take down Cassio, and doing so, Cassio, who has the higher position of lieutenant above him. It says Cassio is a proper man. Proper here glossed as handsome, and he is. Cassio is, by all accounts, a kind of ladies' man. He's got good manners and etiquette, and he's good looking. Cassio is a proper man. Let me see now, to get his place, meaning his position as lieutenant, and to plume up or gratify my will in double knavery. So knavery is, it's trickery, it's deceit, but here it's double knavery, meaning on the one hand, I will, bring down Othello, but on the other hand, also bring down Cassio as well. How? Let's see. And here's his plan. After some time, to abuse Othello's ears, right, to tell Othello lies, that Cassio is too familiar with his wife, Desdemona. He hath, meaning, you call it Othello, and this is the part where Iago is buying into these caricatured stereotypes of people of color. He, Othello, hath a person and a smooth pose or manner to be suspected, framed to make women false. And they could also be applied to Cassio as well, because Cassio is kind of a ladies' man, so to speak. So, yeah, this is all about his revenge. When we move to Act 2, we're now after the Turks have been routed, or the threat of Turks taking over Cyprus has occurred. And a theme in the play is seeing, as I mentioned earlier, seeing versus appearance, or what is and what is not. And Montano, who is the governor of Cyprus, so he's already there, important figure, says, what from the Cape or from the coast, right, can you discern a sea at sea, to one of, the soldiers, gentlemen. And the first gentleman says, nothing at all, which is kind of this metaphorical response to, we've just moved from the world of sociality in Venice, a major port of commerce, to this fairly small island in the Mediterranean, and there's a storm or tempest out, and I can't make anything out because things are incredibly chaotic. And this is part of the inward spiral circle that I mentioned of centripetal movement of things going awry, if you will. A third gentleman comes in and says, our wars are done. The desperate tempest or storm hath so banged the Turks that their designment halts. So they, the storm basically caused the demise of the Turkish fleet. So Cassio, who is lieutenant, comes with Desdemona first. And that's important to know, that it's Cassio arriving first as opposed to Othello, because of the order in which people arrive and what happens. So enter Cassio, and he, goes on to say that, we got separated on sea, God give Othello defense against the elements, for I've lost him on a dangerous sea, meaning they've been separated. That's why he's first. And then Montano, the governor, asks, but good lieutenant, is your general wived? That is your general Othello married? And look how he responds in a very we might say, too positive manner, too admirable language about Desdemona. Most fortunately, he, Othello, hath achieved a maid that paragons or stands above description and wild fame, one that excels the quirk of blazoning pens, and in the investual virtue of creation does tire the engineer. Basically, he's saying he's married a goddess, right? And the reason this is important is because this view that of Cassio that Desdemona is super fine will help Iago, accurately portray that Cassio really kind of does admire Desdemona. And gentleman says, "'Tis one Iago ensign to the general who's coming in, the divine Desdemona again, like she's a goddess," Cassio says. There's a little bit of a body language here, and Cassio saying, "She that I spake of," meaning Desdemona, "our great captain's captain, left in the conduct of the bold Iago." So the captain's captain would be that Desdemona's in charge, right? Even though, yes, Othello is the general, this phrase, our captain's captain, means that the one really in charge of, in this case, the general, is Desdemona. And I'll let you imagine what sexual connotation he means by that, because it's throughout the play. So after Cassio comes in on the scene, all together, Desdemona, Iago, and Emilia, and Roderigo all come in. Now, what's curious is that Roderigo will be disguised in a beard. And what we have to do as audience members is believe that they don't, everyone else, Desdemona, Brabantio, Othello, that they don't recognize Roderigo because he has a beard. It's a little bit, taxing in our disbelief, but we just have to go with it because that's how the play is written. So they all come in on the scene, and Cassio says, "The riches of the ship is come on shore," meaning really Desdemona. "You men of Cyprus, let her have your knees," meaning, everyone should kneel to Desdemona. And, rightly so, perhaps. She's not only aristocratic, but she's now the general's wife. And then on this next page, some really interesting action occurs. Cassio says, "Good ensign," so this means Iago, who's the lower rank ensign, because Cassio is a lieutenant. "Good ensign, you're welcome." And then he takes Emilia's hand, and Emilia is Iago's wife. And so right in front of Iago, he either takes her hand or, depending on how it's portrayed on stage, kisses her on the cheek. But in either way, he kisses Emilia and says to her, "Welcome, mistress." And he does not mean here mistress like she's, having an affair in that kind of connotation. But if you, just for 2 seconds, think about the MRS abbreviation, as in Mrs. Johnson or Mrs. Smith, that MRS is abbreviated for this word mistress. So Emilia is the legitimate mistress, MRS, of Iago. "Welcome, mistress. Let it not gall your patience or anger your patience, good Iago, that I extend my manners. 'Tis my breeding that gives me this bold show of courtesy." And he's referring to, as I mentioned earlier, that he's from Florence, and in Florence, this is how they greet women of status. So don't get upset by it, right? But rather than be upset at rather be upset at Cassio, the very next line is so revealing about Iago's relationship to not just his wife Emilia, but to women in general. He says, "Sir, would she, or if she would give you so much of her lips in terms of kissing as she would of her tongue, she outbestows on me, tongue meaning her speech, you would have enough. So he's basically saying, in other words, if she gave you so much of her kisses as she gives me of her, nagging mouth and speech as she, bestows on me, then you would have enough of her kisses. And Desdemona, kind of in defense of her, of Emilia, says, alas, she has no speech. And then again, right back at it, criticizing his wife, and faith too much. In other words, the no speech here is like, you've shocked your wife, she doesn't say anything. And then Iago, in the pun, right, in faith or in truth, she has too much speech, she speaks too much, which you could argue in Act 5 is maybe her downfall. And then all of this negative language about women, because this is both a play about patriarchy, but also about the specter of misogyny, which we've been seeing throughout this whole semester, whether it's in the Bible or the Quran or, in the Catholic Church of Luther and so on. Come on, you are pictures out of doors, bells in your parlors, wildcats in your kitchens, saints in your injuries, devils being offended, players in your housewifery, and hussies in your bed. What he's saying, one, about his wife, but also about women in general. So that's kind of important to think about in terms of what Iago views about women. Then Desdemona tries to, again, defend Emilia here. And then Cassio and Desdemona talk apart. That's kind of important to note. Again, the action. So pay close attention to the stage direction, which are in square brackets. So while Cassio and Desdemona are talking aside, excuse me, are talking to the side, in what's called an aside here. An aside is a particular stage technique of dialogue where there are multiple characters on the stage and one literally kind of turns either to the audience or turns aside his body or her body and speaks, but the language that is spoken during the aside can only be heard by the audience. It can't be heard by the other characters on stage, even though they might be like 2 or 3 feet away. So as Cassio and Desdemona are talking, in an aside, Iago says to himself, which the audience can hear, he takes her by the palm, aye, well said, whisper, with as little a web as this, I will ensnare as great a fly as Cassio, which introduces another metaphor for Iago, aside from an engineer, puppet master, chess master. He can be seen as a spider that's weaving its web to entrap various people. And he's going to entrap them with this, that, oh, I see that you actually do have a kind of rapport with Emilia. So Othello finally enters the scene. And in another aside, because you remember he hates Othello, we learned this at the end of Act 1. So only the audience can hear this. He says, oh, you're a well-tuned now. He's talking about Othello, tuned meaning you're well, like, prepped and in your prime now, but I'll set down the pegs on that, that make this music as honest as I am. And he's here in the footnote describes this about playing Iago playing Othello like a flute or a fiddle, so to speak, right? So if you think of a recorder or a flute, where you put your fingers over the holes to literally play the music and notes, he says I'll set down the pegs to make this music. He knows I'm totally gonna play you, literally and figuratively. So Othello, of course, announces that the Turks are drowned, they're done. And Othello and Desdemona leave because, in fact, it is technically their honeymoon, right? They got married. They weren't allowed to, consummate their marriage because they immediately set off to Cyprus, and they were on different ships. So they're going to have their wedding night, so to speak. But it's only Iago and Roderigo, right? And so he is going to tell Roderigo about his plan, right? Which is that, he wants him to, right here, he's going to kind of make Roderigo believe that Cassio is in fact enamored of Desdemona, and Roderigo disbelieves it, right? He'll say, dost thou not see her paddle with the palm of his hand? Dost not thou mark that? Like, didn't you see Cassio take her hand and be familiar with her? Yes, that I did, but that was but courtesy, right? So again, that's the way that Cassio behaves in his Florentine training. And Roderigo's not immediately buying it, but then Cassio says quite clearly, or Iago says quite clearly, but sir, be you ruled by me. That is, like, you will listen to me. I have brought you from Venice, watch you tonight, meaning to keep a watch, for the command, I'll lay it upon you. Cassio knows you not, which is true. He doesn't know Roderigo. I'll be not far from you. Do you find some occasion to anger Cassio, either by speaking too loud or tainting his discipline, or from what other course you please, which the time shall more favorably minister? We shall find out later. So it's this part right here. Do you find some occasion to anger Cassio? So it is, in fact, there is a fight that will occur, and it is, in fact, Roderigo who instigates or starts the fight. Cassio, of course, is willing to fight, but it's because Iago has put Roderigo up to this plan. He says quite clearly, provoke Cassio, that he may, for even out of that will I cause these of Cyprus to mutiny, which is an official, military designation of when there's no law and order, and thus people can be murdered, and they're not following, in this case, the general's rules. Some cause these to mutiny, whose qualifications shall come into no true taste again, but by the displanting of Cassio. The displanting would be, of course, the removal of Cassio from his post, which is one of the things that Iago wants. So once Roderigo has left here, we have yet another soliloquy, often, but not always, soliloquies in the acts. And he's going to here say about, again, but partly led to diet my revenge or feed my revenge, that for that I do suspect, he doesn't know, but I do suspect the lusty Moor, there's that stereotype again, hath leapt into my seat, meaning right here, slept with my wife, right? The thought whereof doth like a poisonous mineral gnaw my inwards. Like jealousy, which he's describing here. It's something that we experience in a kind of internal way that gnaws at our imagination. So here in Act 2, Scene 2 is where the brief information about there is going to be, because the Turkish fleet is drowned, there's going to be basically a party, or as it says here, a liberty of feasting from this hour till 5 in the morning, right? So that's important to know because there's already kind of chaos brewing, not only with the weather, but with Iago's machinations. And now we're going to have a party. And when people are drinking, things often go awry. And in Act 2.3, this is where we have the fight. So Othello literally commissions Michael, good Michael Cassio, look you to the guard tonight. Like, okay, because I'm going to go off to my honeymoon night with Desdemona, you need to be in charge of, you know, the entire citadel and Cyprus, basically. So Iago comes in on the scene, and he's going to immediately try to get Cassio drunk. Come, Lieutenant, I have a stoup, or, you know, 2 quarts. 2 quarts is pretty, you know, that's half a gallon. I have a stoup of wine here, and here, without our brace or a group of, young gentlemen of Cyprus gallants that would fain have a measure to the health of the Black Othello. And Cassio says 2 things. One, I've already had some, right? I've already been drinking tonight, but also I have very poor and unhappy brains for drinking, right? So I have had 1 cup already, but it's important to know that Cassio can't hold his liquor very well. And of course, Iago will just goad him into that even more. He says, Cassio, I am unfortunate in the infirmity and dare not task my weakness with any more alcohol, right? Or wine. And back then, wine would have not have been the sort of 10 to 12% it is today. It would have been undiluted and much stronger, around 20, 27%. So, you know, having been in the military, I can vouch for you that one of the sort of manifestations of demonstrating your machismo, hanging with the guys, is how much you can drink, right? And, you know, remain relatively rational and sober. Iago says, if I can but fasten 1 cup, have him drink, you know, 1 cup with that which he had drunk already tonight already, he'll be as full of quarrel and offense as my young mistress' dog. In other words, he'll be quick to anger if I can just get him to drink more. Montano comes in on the scene. Remember, Montano is the Cyprus governor, so he's pretty important. And then they've been drinking, and then they finish their song and they're drinking, and Cassio says, let's to our affairs. God forgive us our sins. That is for drinking on duty, basically. Gentlemen, let's look to our business. Do not think, gentlemen, I am drunk. This is my ensign. This is my right hand, and this is my left. I am not drunk now. I can stand well enough and speak well enough. So if you've ever been around people who've been drinking and they're actually drunk, you'll know that that's a common thing, is for them to announce that they're not drunk. But we can all tell, those of us who are sober, that in fact they are drunk. You must not think that I am drunk. And then he leaves. And then Iago basically signals, once Cassio has left the stage, to go have Roderigo track him down and, basically start a fight. So Roderigo comes in on the scene, and in an aside, right, that no one else can hear, so Montano can't hear, he says, how now, Roderigo, I pray you, after the lieutenant, go, right? So he's basically setting, like a dog, setting Roderigo on Cassio's heels. And then there's this noise, right? Here's where the kind of fight breaks out. But hark, what noise? Of course, Iago, even though he's saying this, he knows what noise. Enter Cassio driving in Roderigo. That is, he's driving him in with his sword, because Roderigo has incensed Cassio somehow. Swoons, or God's wounds, you rogue, you rascal. Montano, what's the matter, Lieutenant? A knave, teach me my duty. I'll beat the knave into a twig and bottle. That is, I'll beat your head into a bottle. Well, beat me, so they go at it, right? And then Montano tries to break up the fights. Remember that Cassio is drunk, right? Montano says, "Nay, good lieutenant, I pray you, sir, hold your hand." And Cassio, indignant, says, rather than, giving deference to the governor of Cyprus, he says, "Let me go, sir, or I'll knock you over the mazzard, or the forehead." And then Montano says what every drunk person doesn't want to hear: "Come, you're drunk. And then Cassio turns his anger and fight onto Montano. And they fight. And unfortunately, Cassio wounds Montano. Now, in the film, if you're watching the film, the way that they portray this is that instead of Cassio stabbing Montano, it's actually Iago running up behind Montano and stabbing him. But either way, Montano is stabbed and wounded. So this ruckus has caused Othello to get out of bed. And remember, he's having his honeymoon night, so he's doubly upset. One, for this, this is precisely what the guard, which Cassio was in charge of, is supposed to prevent. It's supposed to prevent, fights, and it's supposed to maintain order. And then Cassio says, "I'll return Turks," meaning Turks are the barbaric ones, not Christians like ourselves. "I'll return Turks, and to ourselves do that which heaven hath forbid the Ottomites." And then he's so angry, he says, "He that stirs next, or moves next, to carve for his own rage, holds his soul light. He dies upon his motion." In other words, the next person to move, I'm going to stab. He's that angry. And then he goes to Iago to ask, "What happened here? Honest Iago, that looks dead with grieving, speak. Who began this? On thy love, that is, on my love of friendship for thee, I charge thee," right? And initially, Iago says he doesn't know, but he does eventually say it quite clearly. Othello asks again, "Iago, who began it?" And then Iago answers, "Touch me not so dear. I had rather have this tongue cut out or cut from my mouth than it should do offense to Michael Cassio." So even in the denouncement that, "Oh, don't make me tell who it was. I would rather have my tongue cut out than say who it was," that it was Michael Cassio. So in the very telling, he rats out Michael Cassio, which is, of course, exactly what he wanted to do, right? And then Othello, quite upset with, understandably, his new lieutenant in charge of the guard, he says, "I know, Iago, thy honesty," he's not being honest at all, he's a complete liar, "thy honesty and love this mince, or, reduce this matter, making it light to Cassio. Cassio, I love thee, but never more be officer of mine." And at this moment in the film, they show him removing the blue sash to indicate his status as the guard. And so at this moment, what he's done is he's basically decommissioned Cassio. Not just say you're no longer in charge of the guard tonight, but you're no longer in the military. Never be more officer of mine, right? And then Desdemona has eventually gotten roused, and woken up, and she's now downstairs, and Othello sees this and he says, "Look, if my gentle love not be raised up, I'll make thee an example." And he, in the film anyway, he hits Cassio. All of this results in Cassio lamenting his reputation. His reputation as an officer, but also as a gentleman. And he says here, kind of famously, reputation, oh, I've lost I've lost my reputation. I've lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. My reputation, Iago, my reputation. Because if you think about it, folks, without your reputation, what are you? Right? Think about everything that rests upon your reputation. You write a check. That check is only good because the signature that you put on that name is based on the reputation that you pay your debts, or your credit check, right? It's your credit score. It's all based on your reputation as how reliable and credible or believable you are as someone who pays your debts. Aside from the other kind of moral reputation. And Iago says here very famously something that is quite true. Well, first of all, he makes a joke. He says, as I'm an honest man, I thought you'd received some bodily wound. There's more sense, and he means here both bodily sense, but also logic, and that and being wounded than in reputation. So he's like, the way you're whining like a little, you know what, I thought you had been wounded the way you're kind of whining here. And he says, reputation is an idle and most false imposition or artificial notion, oft got without merit and lost without deserving. You have lost no reputation at all unless you repute yourself a loser, such a loser. So the irony is that on the one hand, this is totally true. That is, reputation is often gotten without merit, that someone hasn't earned the reputation. Let me just take our former president, and I use that term lightly, of being, a solid businessman for one, after so many bankruptcies, or being, a moral person or someone who is actually looking out for the good of the country. So that's, you could say, a reputation that has been gotten without merit. He didn't actually earn it. And likewise, you can have a reputation and then lose it without deserving to lose it, right? So think back to rumor and gossip, whether in high school or college, of so-and-so sleeping with so-and-so, even though it's not true, but just the mere mention or allegation of it causes one or more people to lose their reputation and lose it without deserving. So on the one hand, this is totally true, what Iago says. And on the other hand, it's ironic because it's Iago saying it, and he, of all people who knows and understands about reputation, is doing exactly that. That is, he is causing people like Cassio here to lose his reputation, and eventually other people to lose their reputation. So he's going to, at the end of this act, tell what's his name, Cassio, to go to Desdemona and ply your case. Basically, he says, I'll tell you what you shall do. So, right, again, engineer, chess master, puppet master. Our general's wife, so Desdemona, is now the general. And again, that's like that captain's captain phrase earlier, like she's the one in charge, both perhaps in bed, but also in terms of how she rules the emotion and intellect of her husband. And he tells Cassio, confess yourself freely to her, that is, go make your case to Desdemona. Importune her help to put you in your place again. That is, go basically ask the general's wife to help you get your position back. She is so free, and then gloss that as generous. She is so free, so kind, so apt, so blessed a disposition. She holds it a vice in her goodness not to do more than she is requested. In other words, she's basically a good person, which is true, and Iago knows this. And so she's, someone asks her for help, she's going to try to help. So what he's doing here is, and then ironically, Cassio says, "You advise me well." Is he's telling a decommissioned lieutenant not to go straight like a man to the general and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry, I want my job back," but to go to the general's wife and try to get it back that way. It's just, really kind of smarmy and doesn't show a lack of courage. And so now that Cassio has exited, we have another soliloquy, and this act ends on this. And so he's here going to say how he's going to, I play the villain, right? And he's admitting it. But again, this is a soliloquy, so no one else can hear this. He's going to say that, Desdemona is as free as the elements, right? That she's, basically a loose woman. And he says, "Divinity of hell, when devils with the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, as I do now." So you got to stop and digest that. He's saying, like devils, out of hell who put on black sin, before they put on their black sin, they do first put on heavenly shows of being a good nature, which is what he's doing, right? He's trying to look like he's being good to Cassio and other people, but in fact, he's sinful and deceitful. So yeah, he's going to, as he says here, undo her, Desdemona's credit with the Moor, right? Yeah. Roderigo appears, and again, my money is almost spent, because of course, he's been giving it to Iago, but seen nothing for it. Yeah. So this act ends here with, what's his name? Iago saying that he's going to, continue to move on Cassio to make it look as though Cassio is having an affair with Desdemona, but in fact, that's not true. So, all right, that's a long video lecture on Acts 1 and 2, and that is for quiz number 9 this coming Monday, November 8th. Take care, folks.